The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another edition of FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and joined for this edition is Dr. Simon Quick. He's a lecturer in sport coaching at the University of Essex. Someone I've got to know over the past year or so, Simon, but give us a little bit of background about how you got into this role, and then we'll get into some coaching topics.
Hi, Tim. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I kind of ended up, I've kind of gone the long way around of how I've ended up sort of lecturing at university. I come from a PE background, which I think is a great grounding for those who want to go into that coaching space. I taught high school physical education, became an athletic director at the end of it. And then I guess just became a little bit burnt out. I was doing a PhD alongside that. And then at the end of it, I kind of made the transition into research and teaching in higher education and just kind of continuing to do that. But I think certainly the physical education, the pedagogy background has kind of put me kind of in a pretty good position where I am right now.
I couldn't help but smile. You said I got burned out, so I became a professor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of realizing there's burnout and there's just different ways, aren't there, to kind of have that. I mean, the context was I was working abroad. I was in South America. We were working 6-day weeks, 60-hour weeks. I had to be there even if I wasn't doing anything. It was kind of a contractual based thing of working abroad, and it wasn't paid on the outputs. It was just the amount of hours that you do, and the hours were just crazy hours. You weren't so much paid to think; it was more paid to be. It was a job that I kind of always wanted to do, so I got that. But then it's just interesting. Sometimes once you step into the role, when you're a little bit younger, a little bit more naive, you realize actually I'm not sure this is all it's cracked up to be. And I think some of that kind of links to coaching that we'll talk about today as well. So
yeah, so talk a little bit about that. You've worked with a variety of coaches as a consultant. You've also done a lot of research on different coaches across different levels. Give us maybe an overview of the landscape of coaching as it pertains to, I'm assuming, primarily England. What's the state of coaching? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that maybe you're doing well over there that we should be replicating here in the US?
Well, I mean, the state of the landscape is still that it's an incredibly strong volunteer workforce that kind of creates problems in terms of licensing and certification. But on the other hand, these are people who give their time willingly to help others. Sometimes they've got kids in their team. They're giving up hours. They've got weekends. So it's a volunteer workforce that we can't overlook, but at the same time, I feel that we need to do better. We have to provide some form of education for these people who give up their time, and I think we need to reward them in that way. I think certainly in England, sort of coach education is definitely improving. I think it's becoming a lot more fixed, a lot more research informed, which is great. And you can see there's more variety in the way that we're assessing coaches. We're trying to do more in situ work with them at the same time. And yet, to be honest, from my experience as a kind of coach developer, the real high quality value work ends up with that kind of one-to-one coach education space where coaches They want someone to talk to. They appreciate you investing their time, stepping temporarily into their world. And I think that's kind of where we need to go. But at the same time, for those national governing bodies, providing that level of care, that support at the same time is incredibly difficult. And I mean, as I said before, I come from a kind of a teaching background, and I always draw parallels. I mean, sort of a lot of the coaching-based research came from teaching physical education in the first place. But I mean, coaching, it's a in terms of educating coaches, keeping up professional development and things, it's harder for coaches, right? Like it's way harder. You're coaching unsociable hours, you're coaching weekends. You want to go and do a course, you need to take time off. You need to fund it sometimes yourself. It's a loss of income. So I always think sort of they have a much harder space, I think, than some of the physical education positions I've been in. I mean, if I wanted to go and do a course, it was a case of go ask the head teacher and can I do this course? Yep, you're still going to pay me. That's fine. That's great. But coaching, I think it's much harder. And I think any way that we can support them, and the main way I've done that really is through coach development. I think really that's the way that we need to go. And I think the research is also suggesting that as well.
Yeah, well, while you were talking, I thought, you know what, I'm going to choose a random sport in England, and then we're going to talk about the realities of what you just said, which I said, okay, let's choose field hockey. And I looked, and there's 15,000 coaches of field hockey in England or the UK. I wasn't sure. We'll stick with England. 15,000 coaches. And you said that the best way to support coaches is one-on-one, right? Mentorship, going in, observing them practice, giving feedback, etc. The realities are that would be wonderful, but there aren't 15,000 of us. And I would also argue many coaches don't want somebody coming in and watching them coach because of fear of reprisals, fear of criticism, fear of many things, or just a laissez-faire, I don't care. I'm just doing this for a couple of years because my kids are in this program and then I'm out. So all that said, what is the system or maybe the solution to ensuring that these many volunteer coaches get some kind of education, but the ones who really want to grow and pursue can go to the next stage and get the real support that we can offer?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not one to comment, I think, on all sports here in the UK. My impression is that is the model that is generally happening here. So when I say that, we kind of have grassroots qualifications, of which some are pretty much entry level for volunteer coaches. They can go and do things.
Let me pause you there. So just to clarify, if I'm a volunteer coach for field hockey, I have to complete some kind of training before I'm allowed to work with children and youth.
The answer in coaching is very much, as always, it depends. You certainly wouldn't be allowed to go out and coach a field hockey session, let's say under 10s, on your own. Like absolutely no way you couldn't do that. There will be courses that you'd need to take, for example, safeguarding training. I mean, national governing bodies are starting to align, but things like concussion-based training, maybe defib training, there will be a package of qualifications that are going to be needed for you to do that. However, if you want to be an assistant coach, for example, let's say you wanted to be my assistant field hockey coach, I was going out there, then yeah, you're going to need a safeguarding, what we have in the UK is a DBS check. That's like a safeguarding check to make sure that you're safe to work with kids. But then nothing really beyond that if you're an assistant coach, because the responsibility lies with me. Like, I'm the head coach of that session, and therefore anything that goes wrong with it, that lies with me.
So who pays for all this training?
Typically, at entry level, it's sort of the individual. It may be that you're fortunate enough to be in with a particular club. That club might have an agenda. They might say, for example, you know what, we need some level 1 coaches. We're going to put, I don't know, 50% of the funding towards it. So I've been doing some research at a gymnastics club over the last year and a half. And they heavily rely on sort of 16, 17, 18-year-old former gymnasts making that transition into coaching. And so they will quite often, sometimes 100% subsidize that level 1 for them to come in, and they can do it in that way. And then when they go to level 2, there's things like arrangements that are made, again, just to support them. But that's individual to the club. I mean, they don't have to do that. It's great that they do, but it very, very much depends on the place where you are. So yeah, it's a little messy.
Why do you? It is messy, but there's still some standards. There's still some expectations of you have done some fundamental training necessary to ensure this, at least the safety of the people that you're working with, which unfortunately in the US we're still not there. Why? Maybe you don't know the answer to this, but why have you advanced to that stage where here in the US we have not?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe we're going to need longer to unpack that one for sure. But I mean, we've had a series of, I suppose, coaching political developments, I guess. And if you kind of look through history, and I'm not particularly solid with it, so I'm not going to sort of heavily commit to it, but there was a time, maybe 20 years ago, where we, as sort of governing body, UK Coaching, tried to align our coaching qualifications, UKCC, and they tried to kind of get to this level 2-ness. Okay, so a level 2 qualification was the one that you needed to be able to go and coach independently on your own safely. Not up to like Olympic level, but if you wanted to go into a club, you needed your level 2. And throughout that time, sort of lots of sports started to standardize, so they used to come in line with it. We've drifted apart from that, but I think on the whole, it was a useful process, I think, in many sports coming together to try and standardize their level of coaching qualification as to what was needed fundamentally in order to do that. So that happened historically, but then at the same time, I honestly believe that not UK coaching, but coaching here in the UK is pretty susceptible to some of the media reports that come out. And I'm talking that we've had things in swimming, we've had things in gymnastics, we've had really publicly available documentation that's come out and found severe kind of shortfalls in duty of care to athletes at the same time. And certainly these have encouraged, I think, sort of NGBs to very strongly reflect. Reflect is probably a kind word, but make some wholesale changes to the quality of provision that they're offering for coaches and for athletes at the same time. And that's definitely a good thing that they're doing. And I don't know whether that's happened in the US as not. I mean, I'd be interested to know.
Yeah. Again, I speak with limited knowledge, and by the way, if you're watching live, feel free to put a question for Simon in your chat box, comment section, wherever you're watching from. Within the US, I think one of the differences is that you have a government funded entity, and in the US we do not. And so while we have the US Olympic Paralympic Committee, they raise their own funds, whether it be sponsorships, donors, and so on. And while they oversee IOC recognized sports and can provide some funding to those sports, each sport tends to have its own national governing body. And those NGBs have to raise their own money. So there isn't the government saying, hey, here's $10 million for you to support coach development and education within your sport. It doesn't happen. And so the onus then becomes on the sport to develop their own standards. And I think there's a genuine fear in the US that if standards were put in place, particularly for, I'm thinking high school sports, middle school sports, school sports, I think there would be a great fear we wouldn't have enough coaches. Because again, we go back to who's paying for this training, and is this volunteer who's maybe voluntold because there's no one else. Oh, by the way, in addition to concussion and AED and general health and safety, which is required in schools, we want you to learn how to coach, or we want you to have somebody come and observe you coach and provide feedback. But you've got to pay for it yourself because we don't have the funding for it. And so I think there's a general fear that if we did that in the US, we just wouldn't have coaches. Now, full circle, if we paid coaches better, they may go, well, okay, that's part of the cost of getting this opportunity to do what I love and earn an income. But because coaches in the US, particularly in schools, are in general very poorly paid, well, I'm going to spend all this money and I'm not really going to get that much in return. And I'm doing all of this work, many, many hours spent doing this, working with these kids. No, I'm not going to do it. Now, the volunteer coaches is a completely, it's been described to me multiple times, especially in Florida, as the wild, wild west, even though we're on the east, in the sense that volunteer coaches almost have to have nothing in order to, because we need people. And so I have friends in my community who are coaching who I don't think have had any kind of training, maybe not even background checks, because somebody has to pay for those. And while I would hope that most organizations require those things, not all of them do. And so we seem to be a little bit behind you all. And so my question then, following up on that, is how do you have a shortage of coaches in the UK? Do you have a lack of volunteer coaches, given that they do have to do some kind of training and they may be the ones responsible for paying for it?
Yeah, I mean, again, some deeper questions. I mean, I certainly can't comment on, do we have problems in terms of sourcing coaches nationally? I don't think that we do. I don't think that sort of, I don't hear those kind of words happening that, yeah, we absolutely need to try and get hold of more coaches. The clubs that I work at, when I go in and I work with those coaches, then they turn around quite often and they express, yeah, it's pretty difficult to get coaches, but they still find a way to be able to do it. And in terms of volunteer coaches, again, at the grassroots level, I don't really see that as an issue in terms of getting hold of people, but perhaps it's kind of more difficult, I guess, knowing if we're having quality people coming through. It's more a case of we need boots on the ground, and therefore, if you're the coach of a team and you've got two parents, for example, on the sidelines, and they're willing to give their time, then yeah, you're absolutely going to take that, right? But to answer your question, yeah, I think there probably are slightly more kind of checks and balances in place than what you've described coming through. But I think probably circling back to what you talked about before, that it comes back to that central problem of, are we paying coaches their value? Are we kind of recognizing that? And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because that volunteer workforce that we talked about sort of is undeniably important in terms of getting things done, in terms of getting kids playing, providing organized recreational opportunities for kids to go and play sport. And we can't do without that. But at the same time, if we know there's people who are offering services for free, then that's also problematic in terms of how do we therefore break that cycle. So I've invested X amount of years, X amount of my own money. I have these qualifications, these licenses. Well, that has to be worth something, right? So at the same time, how do we establish the value of what myself as an experienced coach, a qualified coach, I've done the training. How do I convey that value that I have when there's other people who, with very, very noble intentions, are offering something kind of different, and I think it's a big challenge. I certainly don't have an answer for it, but I'm just describing the landscape.
I was hoping for that answer. I mean, you set up the question, so I was going to bounce it back to you. We recognize that sports in society is massive, right? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions participate in sports, and they need some kind of training and education. And so there's a responsibility for somebody to step up and do that. I would argue, perhaps, I've never really articulated this before, so here goes, that sports is an entertainment industry, and therefore, because it's an entertainment industry, our roles are less important than maybe some other professions. Therefore, we are not perceived as vital enough to be paid what we should be. I don't know if I explained that well, but think about it like this. If my car breaks down and I go to the mechanic and I need my car fixed, that mechanic really can set whatever price they want, as long as I perceive it as being reasonable, to get that car fixed, because I need it fixed. It is vital for my ability to function in my family life, in my job. If I have a toothache and I go to the dentist, take my money because I'm in miserable pain and I need you to solve my problem. But when I want my son coached, well, maybe we can skip next week because it's going to cost me this much, because it is not vital to the functioning of my family or my job or something like that. And therefore, I perceive it as something I can give up, almost like a subscription to a TV channel. We don't really need that. Let's give it up. And I see that sometimes in sports, where I feel like people view us as ancillary, as not vital to their success, their function. And just as you alluded to, well, if Simon costs this much, but so-and-so costs this much, I'm going with so-and-so because they're probably pretty similar, because it's just coaching. And that becomes, I suggest, a real problem for us.
Yeah, 100%. You're absolutely right, and it devalues what we have. And I think you gave some great sort of examples there, some great parallel examples. But I think we need to move forward to a position where, if like something like a coaching license, fundamentally, and it means that if you don't have that, then it means that you can't kind of work in that space, or if you do, you need to volunteer coaching license. There has to be some kind of clear separation as to, look, I'm going to be the one managing, organizing, taking responsibility. If anything happens, it's on me. And therefore, I'm worth that value that you talked about paying, right? Because I bring this certain level of expertise to the field here. And I think we need to somehow, in terms of policy, in terms of development, we have to kind of get to that area whereby people know what a coach is. And I think that's one of the biggest problems here, is that a coach is not a babysitter. It's not somebody who just will look after 10 kids and set 2 cones up and pass balls in between. Like that's not what coaching is. And therefore, maybe in addition to that coach qualification that I've talked about there, and maybe differentiating that between the volunteer and the other workforces. Maybe there needs to be some kind of work, I think, in terms of educating those parents as well about, look, this is what you can expect from your coach as well. This is what you're going to see. This is what goes into it. This is why we do it, for example. So I think there's probably a lot of work to be done, I think, around that as well. But the other thing you mentioned, which I was kind of interested in, I'll ask you a follow-up question, was, yeah, you talked about coaches potentially being kind of ancillary and we can go to other places as well. And I've seen that. I think I get that. But I've also seen the flip side of that, that particularly when you start moving into a slightly higher performance and it becomes away from recreational stuff, that I've also seen a lot of parents and families that make tremendous sacrifices as well. And not just talking finances, but I've seen parents driving kids sort of for 2 hours after school every single night and 2 hours back, and they're doing 30 hours a week of training on top of the school load and things like that. And for them, that's a kind of lifestyle. It's a commitment at a really, really young age as well. And certainly for those people that I've seen, they recognize coaching, but I think it comes back to this idea of like coaching domains, in that once we move into a performance space, then I think coaching becomes more valued. But I think what we kind of started this conversation about is at slightly lower levels where maybe there's less of an emphasis on performance and outcomes. How do we still get to recognizing the value that that person is still adding, albeit different, but they still have training, they still have knowledge and expertise. And I just think that's the area that it becomes harder to quantify, right? I think it's becomes a little bit more messy, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I still think we have to. So yeah.
Two follow-up points. One, it still surprises me that coaches don't have meetings with their parents prior to a season, during a season, to outline not only the policies and the rules that will be in place, but also to explain what you do. And I think you made a really good point there of just what is a coach? What are my responsibilities to your child? As opposed to what are your responsibilities to your child and me? Because we talk about, right, parent contracts, player contracts. We don't often talk about a coach contract to the parents, to the players. And I think that may be a good avenue for coaches to consider developing that relationship. The second thing that I think is missing is that coaches don't always articulate the training that they have. They don't explain what they've done that allows them to be there. Perhaps because they haven't. That's a possibility. Well, I played in, university, college. I was a professional player. Therefore, I automatically generate respect and an assumption that I know what I'm doing. That, by the way, is dangerous. We see it all the time. I had a coach recently tell me, yeah, the parents wouldn't listen to me until they learned that I played at a major university in college. And then all of a sudden they listened to me. And he was shaking his head like, I can't believe this. I was just an athlete. Who cares? But to them, that was important. So I think there's also that you're coming to me as part of this parent meeting, you're coming to me. Here is the training I've received. Here are the qualifications I have that allow me to be effective for your child or adult. And this is why I should be paid. Rather than, well, I was a great player and people know my name, so we'll see how it goes. Or at my last school, this was my record. Or my last club, this was how well I did. Therefore, you should just automatically assume that I know what I'm doing. It was interesting. Last week, somebody sent me something, and this coach had been fired. I don't remember the school, but they'd been fired. And the comment was, I can't believe they got fired with such a great record last season. And my response was, how are we identifying quality coaching? Just because somebody had a great record doesn't mean that they weren't a horrific coach to human beings, or knew what they were doing. Maybe they got that record in spite of the coach, not because of the coach. So I think there's value in coaches really promoting their training, right? Really having that on their resume, talking about their training, because we tend not to. And, you know, I go back to the clients I have that I coach privately, and I think back to how many times have I actually told them of my training in the sport and my qualifications. And a lot of them don't even know what I do for a living. Really, they don't. And when they find out, oh my goodness, really? You coach coaches and you're coaching me? That's amazing. And I think maybe we should be tooting our own horns a little bit, and we should be promoting our training and experience and qualifications a little bit more than we should, rather than being this maybe humble coach who doesn't really want to talk about how well trained they are and how good they are. I don't know.
I'm smiling and laughing here because as I normally do, I kind of have a pen and paper. There's a lot that we're covering here, and to respond to what you say, and the word humble is something I have down. And yeah, you're absolutely right. So I come from a physical education background, working within schools, and I think the training I had was that, look, you're a teacher, and there's so many parallels with teaching and coaching, but you're a teacher. You can always get better. You need to stay humble. Every day is different. What are you going to do to improve? Where are your reflections? Like, how are you going to do your planning? Like, occasionally you'll get a pat on the back and someone says you do a good job, but it's stay humble. And it's almost like that's like ingrained into you, stay humble. And that goes completely against what you're suggesting. And you're right, like we need to. But it's hard. It's hard for me to kind of say, look, here's my resume. This is what I've done. This is what I've achieved. But here's how I can help you. Let me explain my coaching philosophy and what I value and how I think this fits in. It's like I need to almost get rebooted. I need to sort of have a different way of thinking, because you're right. Because if I don't tell them, they're not going to know. Yeah. So why would they? So the onus is on me as a coach to verbalize and say, here's what I can do. This is how I'm working. This is how I think we could be a good fit. But there's also 15 years of training, which directly goes against that. So I don't know, maybe as we kind of move forward and coach education develops, maybe we need to kind of build that in and say, don't be so humble, or at least more accurately do that. And then the other thing you spoke about was this idea of winning. And so somebody's got a great record, for example, but that's not necessarily an indication of quality at all. And yeah, I've been in sort of pretty high performance environments, and I've seen coaches who are incentivized with win bonuses. And it's like the end of the season. If you go 11-5, here's the check. Yeah, if you're one below that, sorry, no summer holiday payment for you. And do you know what? It just creates this whole kind of host of problems, because if winning is the sole goal and that's what you want to be judged on, then it just leads to this area of potential for unethical practices, and we're not looking at athletes in the whole, and it almost questions to why you're in that space in the first place at the same time. So yeah, I just kind of thought about what you said there about winning. I kind of feel that it's important in some places, but it's a partial picture, right, of kind of what the coaching processes should be. And it's something that I've seen some people hide behind. There's some pretty kind of mediocre coaching happening, but they're in a culture and a system that produces athletes. But at the same time, if I asked them to reflect on what they were doing well, I'm not sure that the answers I'd have would be particularly deep or meaningful. So, and yeah, that was always a problem for me, kind of working with some of those coaches. And this is kind of probably circling back to what we talked about. some coaches want to learn really deeply, and others don't want to be scrutinized, as we talked about before.
I think by others, you mean, I would argue most.
I mean, I think you're probably right. I would say there's a heck of a lot that don't want it because they don't see value. They don't see, why would Tim, you're coming here, you're judging me. Instead of the mindset, Tim's coming here and he's gonna, to help me. And it becomes more judgmental than developmental. And again, I think that's where the teaching background comes in. It's like when I was teaching, you teach with the classroom door open. Anybody can come in all the time. There's no hidden practices. You used to actively ask, like, come and sit in, like, tell me what you think. And I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that that's happening in the coaching spaces kind of yet. I mean, it'd be great to get there, but there's just, I think, fear of judgment, right? And I'm not sure. Like, can I ask why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the mindset in most coaches?
Well, I think you stated it a few minutes ago. There, we are judged by our wins and losses, and we don't have safety in our jobs where somebody can come in and observe you teach, but you're going to be teaching there next year. It's not, unless you do something incredibly egregious, you have a job as long as you want it for the most part. Whereas in coaching, no, that's not how it works. Unless you're some volunteer coach who just doing it to help out and, like, have fun, and there's no real, we don't keep score attitude, even though everybody knows we do, and so do the kids, but we won't go there. There's this fear of failure, because failure leads to rejection, termination, etc. I do want to jump back a little bit to this idea of being qualified to know what you're doing and to be rewarded for it. And I know there's a story that has been going around social media for many years about this company had built this massive ship, and the engine wouldn't work. They couldn't figure it out. They tried all kinds of things, and finally they brought in this mechanic. This mechanic came into the ship and asked for a hammer, gave him a hammer. He walked over to a certain part, hit the side of the engine with a hammer, and boom, it started working. Everybody's yay, off he goes, and he sends this bill. And this bill is for like $10,000. The company call him up. What are you doing? $10,000. I mean, you spent 3 minutes, and we're not paying $10,000. And of course, he responds and explains all of the thousands of hours he'd given in order to be trained to know where to hit the hammer. And that was why he wanted that payment, not because he spent 3 minutes of work, but because he'd spent thousands of hours of work to know where to put the hammer. And as coaches, oftentimes I think we have to show that value, to say, no, this is what I get paid because of all the training I've done. Now, a lot of coaches haven't done that training, and that's where it gets messy, because they may not be able to say, look at all of the experiences I've acquired, look at all of the training I've done to become as good as I am now, which is why you pay me what I get paid here. So it's maybe an interesting analogy, but hopefully shows that coaches shouldn't be just judged on right now. They should be judged on what they've done, how much it's cost them in time and money to get where they are, to get paid what they do. So just while you were talking, that analogy kind of came to me, of just coaches, if you go in and you change one thing about a player or a team, and it makes a difference between winning that NBA championship or not, what is that worth? I want to follow up with a kind of a statement question for you. You and I both were teacher trained in the UK, and I suspect you had a lot of similar experiences to me during your teacher training. And one of them was observations. You got observed a lot, as did I. You also probably had to write reflections on your own teaching experiences, maybe even watch yourself, record yourself, go back, watch yourself doing your job, and reflect on your teaching. And that was very beneficial for me, even though I hated it. Like, I hated my supervisor coming in and watch me teach, and the printer didn't work and the kids just started throwing paper everywhere, the usual stuff. I hated it. But in reflection, decades later, there was so much value in getting that external perspective. One of the things that has really shocked me, maybe not, but it has, is that hasn't transitioned. You said teaching and coaching are very similar, and they are, but that hasn't transitioned into coach education, where coaches are observed by somebody giving them feedback. And I'm not talking about an athletic director coming in and observing a coach, because an AD is looking through the lens of a variety of, they're a stakeholder in the coach. I'm talking about somebody independent. And Simon, you and I have been doing coach development for many years, and I've only ever been asked by one coach in the US to go and watch them coach and give feedback. And I did. And guess what? I didn't judge them. I hopefully helped them. Here's what I saw. Here are things that I saw that you were fantastic doing. Here are some things I think you could change to consider. Here you go. Hope that helps. Bye. But we don't do that. Why not?
Yeah, so I'm kind of interpreting why has this mindset of requesting feedback and external observers not transferred over to coaching. I think probably first and foremost, physical education teaching it's been going on a lot longer than coaching. I think first and foremost, I think that within teaching, as I said before, there's the mindset of stay humble. It's ingrained, always constant pursuit of getting better all the time. And I think that happens within school communities. And I think also, to a large part, the physical education curriculums anyway are very much kind of top down. They're given by government, and therefore there's perhaps what I would argue like less potential for deviation away from kind of what the outcomes need to be. So like, you'll know this, Tim, but like if you're teaching, I don't know, if you're teaching athletics shot put, for example, there's pretty few ways that kind of we can teach kids to do that, right? Like, we'll kind of know there's possibly 3 or 4 ways, we'll see them all, and we can kind of do that. So there's less room for interpretation. But I think coaching is newer. I don't think it's obviously not been around as long. I think the fact that there are so many ways, different advice given to coaches from some qualified people, some not quite so qualified people, I think it just makes people feel like quite uncertain, I think, of their own abilities in terms of, is what I'm doing right? But then rather than going, I want to check what I'm doing is right, it's more like, how about you just don't watch? And I think that's kind of unfortunately where we are. And coming from schools, like you just can't get away with it. Like you are going to be seen by somebody in your proximity. But coaching, you might work with a team on your own for, I don't know, most of the season, and you might not even see another coach who's on the next field. So, and I think what happens is that the longer between those periods of observation go, the harder it is, right, to suddenly say, hey, Tim, can we schedule like an observation? I want to get better. Because it's almost like that fear, and you described it like brilliantly. When you start teaching, you get observed every day. And so therefore, after 2 weeks, you're like, I'm done with specially preparing. I'm just going to go into normal. Like, you can watch me if you want. I don't care. I'm just going to do it because I think I've done it enough times. But in coaching, I just don't think that, because it's not systematic enough, I think it becomes really difficult. But I have seen some coaches that are intentional, and they work in special performance environments, and they do request that, and they've asked me to go video them. We sat down afterwards. I've drawn out clips, and we've talked about this, and we've unpacked it, and that's great. But I just don't think in coaching that happens often enough. And then the other thing I'd say, Tim, is that the lower down the hierarchy you go, I think, for example, if we give a random example, like a level one football coach, if they wanted to ask another level one football coach to come and observe them, I would ask the sincere question: do they have sufficient knowledge to be able to give that kind of observation back? Because we know that reflections need to be given by arguably someone kind of more knowledgeable to help them get to that kind of new space. And therefore, it's a question of who are you asking to come and observe, and are those people readily available? So if we talk about us working as coach developers, we're not going to be able to see that many. We'll do our best, but we can't. So therefore, who do those coaches come and ask that have a higher knowledge base to be able to come to them and do that? I don't know. I just don't have a solution for that. But yeah, I think is that person in a position to be able to genuinely help them? I don't know. Potentially not.
Couple of points to piggyback onto that. One, I took a call yesterday from a undergraduate student in England who wants to come to the US and do a degree in coaching, which is great. Was able to inform him, hey, our program's online. You don't even need to come to the US. You can do our program online. But I don't think he really wanted to do a degree in coaching, as more he wanted a job in the sport. I want to be an assistant coach. I want to get an assistantship so I can coach X, Y, and Z. Okay, fine. So I asked him, so what licenses do you have in this sport? What qualifications? Well, I played, professionally. Okay, that's good. That's valuable. You can use that experience. But what licenses? Because if you're coming and you want to coach in the collegiate level, that's good, but it's not enough. And there was that assumption that, well, but I've been a professional player. So I found that kind of interesting and timely. The second thing, many years ago when I was in a different state, I was hired by the Department of Education to go in and observe teachers in the schools around the state. And this was part of their teacher training. They got their license. I really loved this program, and I wish other states did it. When you got your license, when you got your degree in that state, you didn't automatically get your QTS, as you say in England, your qualified teacher status. You had to be observed by an external person in your environment teaching. And if you passed that, you then got your QTS, your teacher status. And while you talked about how eventually you don't care, right? Just come in and observe me teaching. I'm just teaching. These, of course, were a little bit more staged because they knew we were coming, et cetera. And you could tell that the kids had been bribed or threatened or whatever to behave, et cetera. But not everybody passed. Most did. I would expect them to anyway, because you've got your degree. You've spent plenty of time in schools during your degree teaching, and et cetera. I expect you to pass. Most of them did. Some of them didn't, though. Some of them didn't, and for various reasons. Usually they couldn't control a classroom or something like that. However, what I did find useful was it was an external reviewer, somebody who was not in that school, so they could give an unbiased, objective view, and it wasn't about the content of the class. So I observed chemistry teachers, biology teachers, Spanish teachers, you name it. It really wasn't important as much the content of, well, you said this, but really you should have said it this way. It was more the behaviors, how you manage the classroom. How did you move around the classroom? Could you handle time organization? Did you have all of the materials ready? Were you able to reflect on your teaching and decide how you would change it next time? These are consistent themes across teaching, which are also across coaching. And so a good coach developer, I think, doesn't have to go in and be the shot put coach and say, well, based on my international experience as a shot put coach, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. Maybe that's important. But I think more important is, can you go in and observe how the coach interacts with the athlete, how they organize a practice? Do they do the warm up? Do they do these things that are general themes of coaching, to go back and say, you know what? I can't talk about whether your elbow is high enough for your athlete to throw this shot, but I can tell you that you did these things really, really well, which are consistent with great coaching. That's where I feel like we often go within our sport to get help, rather than sometimes going outside our sport to, let me get somebody from another sport coming in and looking at me and going, wow, I never really thought about it like that, because you come from a different perspective than I do. So from a coach developer point of view, I don't think it's absolutely vital to have somebody within your sport. Can it help? Sometimes, yes. Strategy, technique, sure. Everything else, which may be actually more important than strategy and technique, those are the things that I think most of us could go in and observe and assist with.
Yeah, and I had a coach recently, and he said to me, like, I don't want you to be from my sport. If I want to have knowledge of my sport, I have 20 other coaches I can go and ask about the techniques of how to coach this specific aspect, this whatever it is. What I want you to do is come in and give me a fresh perspective. I want you to speak about talk with the athletes. How do they find me? Talk with my co-coaches. Find about the parents. Give me like a 360 or something that I can't have on my own right now. And yeah, you're right. We're delivering a new program a year and a half from now, and the very first coaching module that I want to put on is I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's like the fundamentals of coaching. It's basically exactly like you described. What's your organization like? What's your management like? How do you interact with other people? And those are things that are universal across. You're absolutely right. And if those foundations are not in place, then we can have the most complex and theoretical conversations like possible, but there's no value to that. It's absolutely, there needs to be some fundamental things in place, and certainly I think, yeah, coming from teaching, that has definitely helped me, I think, as a practitioner, kind of get those things in place. And then, yeah, from that, it's certainly transitioned to coaching. But it's funny, though, how many coaches you speak to, and some of those cornerstones are just not firmly embedded routines. And you talked about external reviewers coming in, and I kind of endorse that. I think that's really great. As an external reviewer to come and see, let's say, you coach, I would be pretty confident that I would see evidence of your embedded routines within your session. So if the kids, for example, are suddenly acting really strange, well, I'll be like, I know Tim doesn't normally do this, so something's definitely wrong here. But if they know they line up properly, they kind of know the structure of the practices, for example, then that's kind of evidence of quality coaching processes over time. That's kind of ultimately what you want to have a look at, rather than this sort of shop window, sort of like have a look into all the bells and whistles that are kind of happening. So yeah, first session I think is going to be fundamentals of coaching, and I think that's kind of what we certainly need to get across in our program first and foremost.
Well, we are way over time because we like talking, and it's always fun. We do this off air a lot too, Simon, don't we? Let me ask you this final question. It's one I typically ask people. If you have advice for coaches, 2 or 3 things, what would you like to pass on based on your experiences?
Yeah, that's a great sign-off question. I, I think the first thing I'd probably say, Tim, is find a good mentor. Like, find somebody who is on the same page as you. Find someone that you look up to and aspire to be. You want to be like them. You see how they coach, and that resonates with you. And I think if you can find that person who's willing to take the time to invest in you as a coach to go back, then that is only ever going to help your coaching. You're going to listen to them, you're going to have something to offer. So find the right mentor first and foremost. And then the second thing I'd say, probably, which probably cuts against the grain of some of what we've talked about today, is that invest in yourself as a coach. Like, if you go to these courses and you take the time out of your day, you sacrifice family time, might even be holidays, and do it. Just think of it as an investment, like in your own knowledge and your own skills and your own career. And think of coaching as a career. And through those investments, they will pay in the end. But then potentially, just dovetailing that onto our final point, just make sure once you've made those investments, just make sure you nicely tell people about them, because at the end of the day, you've gone out the way, you've done it, others haven't, and you deserve it. So don't be shy.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've never really thought about this, but I don't even tell people that I have a doctorate, right? I'm just Tim. All my clients know me as Tim, and that I have all these letters after my name that have trained me to help you be better at what you want to be better at. And so it's a reminder to me that, you know what, we are good at this. We need to justify why we're good at this. We need to show people why we're good at this and what we've done. So thank you for that, Simon. If somebody does want to reach out to you listening to this on our podcast or watching at a later point, best way to reach you is email?
Yeah, please drop me an email. My email is s.quick@essex.ac.uk. That's what we have in the UK, is the AC. But please feel free to drop me an email. Super happy to engage in any of the conversations that we talked about today. I think it's a great series of topics that we covered. So thanks for having me on, Tim.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you, Simon. And just a reminder, we try to do these shows once every couple of weeks or so during the semester. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow our Spotify channel for your podcast. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and Simon Quick, thanks so much for watching.